Okay, so welcome to intermediate training of DesignPlus. You should have all been through core training where you learned the basics of the sidebar and how to use the LTI tools. Today, we really just start to look at some of the bells and whistles that are available as you start to dig into the tools. So there's a lot of content we're going to cover today. As with previous trainings, you're welcome at any point in time to unmute if you have questions. I do also have chat open, so if you want to drop questions in chat. I also do appreciate when, those of you who feel comfortable having your camera on, appreciate that, or even just like the little emojis and stuff that you can throw up. All of that is also nice to know that I haven't put you to sleep in all of the talking that I may be doing in the next 90 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to cover a lot today. We're going to play with styling. So we're going to work with things like colors and margins and padding and building things like accordions and progress bars and lots of content. Not going to go through that list. We're going to hit all of these as we go through. We're going to start today by talking about some of the styling things you can do here at the intermediate level. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this page. And before we can get in and play with these tools, we actually need to turn them on. So we're going to come into the Design Tools sidebar here. And up in the top right, there are these three gears. I'm going to click on those. This is where we can get to the settings. These are all of the additional tools that we're going to take a look at. You'll see some of these are marked as intermediate. Those are the ones we're covering today. Some of them are marked as advanced, as I'm sure you've probably guessed. Those are what we cover in the advanced training. And so these are things you can turn on one at a time, or up here at the top, you can choose a comfort level. So just to kind of give you an idea of how this looks, if I open the Customize the Style section, this is where in core training we worked with images, links, tables, and lists. If I turn on the intermediate level of the tools, now we gain the ability to work with colors and spacing and borders and adding highlights and emphasis. We also gain this Add Advanced Elements section, which is where we'll come when we build accordions and progress bars and some of those pieces. Now, I do want to point out with this Add Advanced Elements section, if I revert back to the basic level, you'll notice I still have the Add Advanced Elements section with just the Module Progress Navigation tool turned on. That's actually because the page that I'm editing has a progress bar built into it. So with a lot of the tools that come into play in the Add Advanced Elements section, if you use one of those tools to build a page and someone else comes in to edit that page who may have not turned that tool on, if it's something that will make them less likely to break things, we will enable that tool for them while they are editing that page. Now, they would need to go turn it on themselves to use it on some other page, but we will make that available for them while they're building in the content. Okay, so I'm going to go to the intermediate level here. I'm also going to set this to automatically launch so I don't have to keep clicking the rocket ship as we go through. And today, we're really just going to start at the top of these new tools and work our way down through this additional functionality. So we're going to start with the Customize the Style section. So with the Customize the Style section, we're just going to take content we already have in Canvas, and we're going to have some fun with the look and feel of it. And the first one that we're going to look at today will teach you a lot about me in that I love to play with color. So this first tool is working with the colors for this stylized heading inside the content. Now, I do also want to note here, when we are building and creating and styling things with the sidebar, we're really just changing the current page. Despite all of my best efforts, I haven't been able to figure out a great way to make it so that you could make changes here and have those changes apply to your whole course. Canvas just isn't built that way. So I recommend with a lot of this, you think through it as you're building out your templates so that then you can use the module builder to push that out and you're not having to manually do all of these things for any page that you might want to work with. So this colors for banner theme, each row here represents a different portion of that stylized heading. And so kind of by hovering over or tabbing through these little eye icons, I can see which portion I would be changing. I can adjust the background color. I can adjust the text color. And then this column is going to let me know if the colors that I have selected meet the WCAG accessibility rating for sufficient color contrast between the text and its background. So I can see this has a AA for normal text and a AAA for large text. Now, that's great. That's meeting WCAG compliance, and most of the other compliances, well, all of the other compliances of which I'm aware are based off of WCAG. So even Section 508 and things like that are based off of WCAG compliance. And so we've got that passing rating. Well, if I want to play with this color, I can come open up the color picker and I can pick from some institutionally defined color swatches. We go over where and how those institutional pieces are set up in the institutional customizations course, that training. So we'll talk about those in another call. But I can also come in here and type in a hexadecimal color value, or just use these color pickers to find a color that I want. Now, if I go a little bit darker here in the color, you'll actually see now I have a AAA rating for both normal text and large text, which is kind of your gold standard. But as long as you've got that AA or AAA, you're meeting compliance. And if you keep an eye on this rating, you'll actually notice that no matter what color I select through here, I'm getting a passing rating. If you watch what's happening in the editor, as I go lighter in color or darker in color, you'll notice that it's going to determine whether black text or white text gives the best contrast. And so when you're working with backgrounds, it's actually very difficult to find something that doesn't meet that accessibility guideline. However, if I decide I want to play with the text color, it does become a whole lot easier to find things that are going to fail. So you just want to keep an eye on that rating there and make sure that you've got a passing rating with the colors that you select. Now, when I do select a color, it will update multiple rows here. So this title and this heading and this section, they are all part of this section. So I could change the colors independently, but in general, if I change the section, it's going to update. They're just going to kind of inherit that. Same with like this unit wrapper. This name and number section are both part of that. And so if I come in here and change the color for that, it's reflecting in those other fields as well, but I could go manually change them. This theme doesn't work quite as much, quite as well with the unit name and number, but some of the other themes are built in such a way that it gives a nice way to adjust those, okay? And that's really just the basics there of working with the colors for that stylized heading. Now, any questions here about this Colors for Banner Theme tool? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. And if I ever move on too fast because you're trying to find your mute button, don't ever hesitate. Unmute, ask me the question. We can go back. Not a problem with that. So the next thing we're actually going to take a look at is the ability to work with the colors of just about anything. In fact, this next current element style is really just a way that you can select an element and do all sorts of fun things with it. So to kind of illustrate how that works, we are going to recreate something like this little important tip box. And I'm going to go ahead and make this, full screen so that we can see this a little bit better. So I have here in my content a heading and a paragraph that we're going to transform to look like this. And to do that, we're going to use the basic color tool, the spacing tool, and the borders tool. Now you'll notice I can open multiple tools in this section over in the sidebar. Me personally, I find I use these in connection with a lot of other tools. And I also kind of like to keep this neat so I can easily get to things. So one of the other things I can do is instead of just expanding them here, in the top right, there's this little button that will actually pull that out of the sidebar. So it kind of pops these out so that I can drag them around on my screen so that I can utilize these while I'm working with other tools as well. Now at the top of each of these is this little apply to section. That lets me know what I'm working with. So if I hover over this selected piece, you can see that that paragraph is what I have selected. If I put my cursor in here, I can see that that level 4 heading is what I have selected. And we'll talk more about that apply to in the future. There's also a little book icon in the top right. That is a link out to our user guide for that particular tool. So if you want to go learn more about that tool, you can click on that link to learn more. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first thing I'm going to do with this heading is I'm going to apply this bluish, greenish, don't know what to call that color, but we're going to apply it to that heading. You can see that it's determined that white text will give us the best contrast. We've got a passing rating here, but if you were to leave it like this, it would drive me nuts because the eye is smashed over against the side. And just in general, that text is cramped in that little space there. And so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to adjust the spacing of this. Now with the spacing tool, I can set padding and I can set margins. I can set all directions at once, or I could pick just a specific direction that I want to adjust. Now, if you're not familiar with the differences between padding and margins, really easy to illustrate. If I put 100 pixels here for margin, you can see I've got a lot of space around that element, but the content is still cramped. Not what I'm looking for in this instance. So I'm going to reset that back to its default. And instead, I am going to give this 10 pixels of padding. So now you can see that move that eye in a little from the side. We've got a little more space above and below. So margins take place between the borders of an element and any other element. And padding takes place between the borders and the content, just like you might wrap something in padding that you're going to ship so it doesn't smash up against the edges. And so, we've got that padding set. And in fact, I'm going to come to this paragraph and I'm going to give it that same padding so it has kind of that consistent feel to it. And then because I'm in this theme that has kind of the alternating light gray pieces, maybe I'm going to come set that to white so that it stands out a little bit more. So not a bad start there. Next, let's talk about adding in a border. So with this paragraph selected, I'm going to come to the borders tool. And with the borders tool, once again, we can set all directions at once, or I could pick just a specific direction. So I'm going to give that a 2 pixel solid border, and I'm going to choose that same bluish greenish color there. Okay, getting closer. But if we're going for this look, we need to get rid of this space here between these two. And if you recall, space between elements is margins. If I look at the spacing tool, you'll actually see that paragraphs by default, they have a top margin. And so I need to get rid of that if I want to bring these together. And it's not enough to just hit delete. I actually need to set that to something. I'm going to set that to 0 because I don't want there to be anything. And so I've set that, but it doesn't really look like anything changed over here. That's actually because if I take a look at this heading, you'll also notice that headings have a default bottom margin. And so if I want to bring two different things together, I need to get rid of the margins from both elements that are keeping them apart. Okay, so that's much closer. It does still look like there's a little bit of a gap there though. Well, in this instance, it's not actually a gap. It's coming from two different things. One of them is that we're in the blocks view. So the blocks view gives you that little bit of an outline around all of your headings and paragraphs so you can kind of see that structure. If I change over to the browser view, that line's lightened up quite a bit, but there is still a line down there. Well, if I look at my borders tool for this heading, I can actually see that this has a default bottom border as part of this particular theme. So I could come set that to none, and now that visual separation has disappeared, and I have more of that connected look. Now, because we are using native Canvas as editor, I could do things like coming here and bolding it, and I could go ahead and center that text. So all those types of things you can use in Canvas, you can still use in connection with this additional functionality that's there in the sidebar. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how you're going to start to use these tools depending on what you want to accomplish. Let me give you a couple of other examples. We showed you in core training how you can select an image and you can float it to the left of the text. Well, for some reason, if that happens to be next to a list, lists have a little bit different spacing than other elements. And so my bullets are kind of right there on the edge of the image, which I may not love. Well, I really don't love. And so what I can do, if you recall, space between elements is margins. And so I've got the image selected and I can see that this has a right margin, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to increase this. Now, because it is a number input, I can actually just use my arrow key, or I could type in a number to really just find what is more of a comfortable spacing to me and go ahead and set that. So that's some additional things you might do with spacing. When it comes to more complex structures, so like let's say I want to change the colors of the heading section of this table. Well, if I put my cursor in here and I'm looking at my apply to, I just have that current cell selected. I have no desire to have to select each of those cells one at a time and change their color. So what I can do with this apply to section is the further we move to the right, we are looking at parent elements. So this is the cell that is inside of this table row, which is inside of the table head, which is inside of the table, which is inside of this div. So we're just looking at higher and higher level elements. So what I could actually do is select the row. So I can click on the row. And now if I come select a color, instead of it just being for the individual cell, it has actually applied it to the row. And so you can start to use that apply to deal with more complex structures. Let me give you one other example of that. Up here at the top, this particular theme has this little line here that goes along it that we can see is green. That's part of the default City Labs colors. Well, if I want to change that, you'll notice that that color was not part of the banner theme section here because it's kind of a one-off thing that's unique to this particular theme. So what I could do instead is I can put my cursor in here, and then using this apply to, I can look at parent elements. Now this one I can see kind of lines up with that line. So I'm going to click on that. And sure enough, I can see that that has a top border. So I could come change the color of that. And so that gives you an idea of how you can use that apply to really just kind of track down where those particular styles come into play. Okay. All right. So that's all I'm going to cover on spacing and borders. Any questions about either of those before I close those up? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close those. We're going to leave colors up because I love color and we're going to play with it for a little bit more as we go through here. The next thing that I want to talk about is when it comes to that more complex structure, there are things you need to pay attention to, particularly in relation to color. So I have this paragraph here. If I come select blue for the background of that, it set the text color to white. I've got a passing accessibility rating. That's great. If I come to this paragraph and I change that background color to blue, it changed the text to white. I've got that passing rating. However, I can now no longer read this link. And if I click in that link, it's going to tell me that it is failing because it's blue text on a blue background. And so as you are working with colors, pay attention to how those colors impact any content that's inside of that, because I may need to come to the text color here and change that to something different to make sure that I've got that passing accessibility there. There are a couple of other buttons that are here in this colors tool. I'm going to choose this paragraph. Now, these light and dark circles, what those will do is they will gradually change the hue of the color. If I click this light circle, that blue color is going to get a little bit lighter. And you'll actually notice we just transitioned to where black text is considered better contrast than white text. So each time I click that, it's going to give you some additional, it's going to get a little bit lighter. Each time I click this one, that color is going to get a little bit darker. You'll also see we just transitioned to where white text is now better contrast. But if you can tell, those two colors are not the same because we added, this is like adding white to the color. This is like adding black to the color. If you've ever mixed paint, you'll know that white and black don't counteract each other. They just make the color more white or the color more black. So if I wanted to go back to an earlier color, there's a couple of different ways I could do that. I could come in here and you can see down here at the bottom, this is the last 7 colors that you've selected. Now, because we were working in very small increments of blue, that's not going to be terribly helpful at this point. But what I could do is if I know this is the blue I was using before, I could just go ahead and select that. The other thing that I can do is each time I change the color, it is triggering an undo point in the editor. So I could use my undo redo buttons up here to step back in time. I can also, now these buttons are the exact same thing you'd get if you did the undo redo here, or if you used the keyboard shortcut keys in the Command Z on a Mac or Control Z on a PC, just lets you step back in time. And so I could keep doing that until I got to that color that I wanted to use. Now, sometimes, and Canvas has been pretty good about this lately, so I don't know if they made an under the hood change, but sometimes that can change where your cursor is as well. So if you're going to make additional changes, you may want to double check to make sure that you are applying to what you think you're applying if you want to make those additional changes. Other things we can do with this, the little X here, that will reset that color back to its default. So if I set the background color for this paragraph back to its default, well, the default background color of a paragraph is transparent, which means now I'm left with white text on a very light gray background, which is definitely not meeting accessibility guidelines. So I'd probably need to reset that text color as well. So that gives you some ideas there. I do see there are some questions here about colors. I will definitely get to those here in just a moment. But I do want to talk about okay. We'll get to those, but I'm going to do them a little bit later because there's some other things I want to talk about the color palette that does include kind of that functionality there. Okay, so up here, we've kind of manually created a call out. Well, we actually do have some that are built in. We have some styles that you can easily choose. We have some block alerts and highlights. Now, a block element in HTML is really just something that takes up a big chunk of content. So this is like a paragraph, a list item, a heading, a table, a div, something that usually would just run from one side of the screen to the other. And so we have some styles we pulled from Canvas's style guide. We have some styles we built specific for DesignPlus. And then we also have some additional styles we pulled in from the Bootstrap CSS framework, which is really just a bunch of predefined style rules that you can use. Canvas was originally built on an earlier version of Bootstrap, so it tends to fit nicely within that kind of feel of Canvas. So we do bring in some of the functionality that they've created. And so with these, if I am working with existing content, I can come open up that block alerts and highlights tool there. And I could select an existing paragraph and I could go ahead and choose the style. Or I could come down and try some of these additional styles. You'll also see that I have the option to remove that. That would just take that back to being a plain paragraph. And so if you have an existing element that you want that style applied to, you can easily do that. However, one of the things that I've encountered is often when I want to use something like this, I have multiple elements that I want to go in. If I just select this and I try and take each of these pieces into one of these, I'm ending up with a lot of different pieces rather than just one call out. So down here at the bottom, there's this wrap selection and a block alert. So I could use my cursor to highlight the content I want to put inside one of these. And I can click that wrap selection. That put a div around all of that selected text and applied that initial style. Now you'll see I don't see the option to remove that. That's actually because if you look at the editor, my cursor's hanging out down here. It's not inside this. So if I put my cursor inside it, I will need to use that apply to find the level where that's set. You know, you found the right spot when you see the option to remove it. But now I could have changed that style and have it applied to that larger chunk of content instead of just each of the individual elements. Now this piece here is very similar to what we talked about in core training with the selection to block button, in that if I do change over to the blocks view, it can and usually will leave behind some little empty remnants. You can use this remove empty like we did in the core training to clean that up. But Canvas is also usually pretty good at cleaning a lot of that up. When you save it, it'll often clean up some of those empty pieces, but it doesn't always catch them. So I usually find myself using that remove empty just so I don't have to come back in if they didn't catch something, okay? All right, any questions about the block alerts and highlights? Okay, so block alerts, big chunks of content. The other one we're going to take a look at is text emphasis and highlights. So this is a way to emphasize a specific word or phrase in your content. And once again, we have some, italic styles, some emphasis styles that come from the Canvas style guide. We have some, highlight colors that we built specific for design tools. And we have some highlight colors and some badge styles that come from kind of the Bootstrap framework. So with this tool, I'm going to use my cursor to highlight the word or phrase I want to emphasize, and then I can come choose a style. And so that, wrapped that, gave it that style. My cursor is also just outside of it. So if I click back into it or use my arrow key to get back into it, I do see that remove option. That also means that I could come in here and I could try out some of these different styles as well to find one that I want. Now, what we are actually doing when you wrap that is we are creating an emphasis tag. Emphasis is what you actually get in Canvas when you italicize something. And so this is so that there's not only a visual indication that you are emphasizing that word or phrase, there is also a structural one that can be read by screen reader users to let them know that you're emphasizing that word or phrase. Okay, so let's say, I really like these rounded pill badge styles inside of Canvas, but I'm not really that fond of the color scheme. Well, I could come into our color picker and I could use it to choose just about any color I want to go ahead and further customize that. I need to do that each time I wanted to use that specific color, but it does give you that increased flexibility and range of colors that you can use. Okay, so here's my caution. Just because you have this really wide range of colors that you can utilize to kind of have some fun with this content does not mean that your pages should start to look like this. This is an example of all the different options that are available. It's not an example of what your pages should look like because you may have associations with these colors, but it's the text of those that is going to distinguish for a screen reader user. And even for some visual users, they can have a hard time distinguishing one color from another. So just because you have this really vast option of, array of colors you can choose from, keep it simple, pick one, maybe two. and use those, and don't assume that students are going to know exactly what you mean by red or green or blue or purple or anything like that. Okay. If I want that text to go back to being normal, I can just remove that emphasis. It goes back to being plain text. Any questions on the text emphasis and highlights? Okay. Last topic here is when it comes to customizing your color palette, because I like to play with colors. So the last section we have here is the ability to customize the palette. We'll cover the questions that were asked in chat here as well. So here are the colors that I have tied to me as a user. I could come in and I could remove those darker colors. Maybe I want to remove these light colors. Maybe I want a slightly different shade of green here. You can make changes like that and save them. If you are crazy enough to actually know hexadecimal color values, or you have access to some color values, you could take a comma separated list of colors and add those in there to get a new row of colors that you can select from. However, most of us don't have a whole lot of hexadecimal colors floating around in our brain. So one of my favorite things to do is use this button down here, this pull colors from image. What this will allow you to do is browse your computer for an image. And I usually like to use the image that I've selected as like the banner for my course. Well, this tool will pull out the top 20 some odd colors that occur inside this image. And so I can use these colors to start to build out my own custom color palette. So these are the colors that occur most often. There's also a preview over here in the corner that's based off of where your cursor is over the image. So I could hover over the image and click on it to pull that color right from the cursor position and add that to my selected list of colors as well. If I want to remove a color, just click it again to uncheck it. You'll also notice that as I hover over these different swatches, it is changing the background color. This is so that I can see how well that color works with the other colors I've selected or I might be considering selecting. It's also updating this table to let me know what kind of accessibility rating I can expect, depending on whether I want this as the background and let the tools automatically determine the text color for me, or if I want to use this as text on a white background. And so we can get a feel for that accessibility even before we've added these over there to our sidebar. Now, I am also very nitpicky about how even my color palettes look, so we can come in here and I can use my cursor or I could use my keyboard to drag and drop and rearrange those to make a nice organized structure there, and then add those over to my palette. So now as a user, as I'm working with my different content, I have these additional colors I can pick and choose from to add to the style. Okay, so let's talk about colors and your color palette. The color palette is tied to you as a user. So it will follow you around as you make these customizations. They'll follow you from course to course, even browser to browser, even computer to computer, but they're tied to you. They're not really tied to the course, which does bring us to some of the drawbacks of this basic color picker. One of the things that I don't like about this color picker, it's a great open source third-party color picker we've been using for years. One thing I don't like about it is it's not keyboard accessible. So if you have users who are just using a keyboard, they can't interact with this color picker. Another thing that I see happen a lot is someone will come in here and they'll, do this nitpicking, find this perfect color, and then they come up to the top and clicks the X to close it, because that's what we're trained to do with X's that appear in the top right corner of things. But if you can tell by that little title that popped up, that doesn't close it. It actually clears out the selected color, which is not usually what you're going for. For some reason, the close button is down here. So that's another thing that drives me a little crazy about this. The next thing that I don't love about this is, in order for you to have the ability to customize your color palette, what happens is that when you first open up the tools, this goes out to where the colors are defined at the institution level, grabs that default color palette and brings it over and ties it to you as a user. But from that point forward, it's tied to you as a user. So if someone at the institution level adds additional colors, or you go through a rebranding or something like that, the only way for you as a user to get those over here would be to reset your palette back to the default, which means it clears out what you had saved as a user, goes to the institution level, grabs that current state and brings it over, which means you've just lost all the custom colors you had. That drives me nuts too. If any of those pieces are things that would drive you nuts, I encourage you to come back for the advanced training, where we will take a look at the advanced color picker. So the advanced color picker is something that I started building to address some of these, but as you can tell, I like color a lot, so I might have just got a little bit carried away with the advanced color picker. And so, that we'll cover that in the advanced training. It does cover, Frank, for your question about can you select a color from the screen? The advanced color picker gives you some functionality to utilize colors that are already being used inside the content. I think the dropdown offers the palette to choose from. Yeah, so that dropdown has the default one. There are also lots of additional things you can do as a user in that advanced one to customize that. And it also separates the institutional colors from the user colors so that the institutional ones always stay up to date without you losing your user color. So lots of fun that comes into the advanced tool. But because I did get a little carried away, I've left this one as kind of the basic tool that comes into play here at the intermediate level of the tools. And I've saved that more advanced one for, the advanced level. Okay. All right. So any other questions about customizing your color palette? Or for that matter, that actually brings us to the end of the customize the style section. So any questions about anything we've covered so far? I do know that we had someone come in a little bit late. So what we did to get to these tools is we came to these 3 gears up here and we selected the intermediate level. That turned on these additional tools that we're playing with in this training. Okay, we good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what we've been doing so far is we've been taking content that was already in Canvas and we've been working with the style for it. That's the customize the style section, current element style tool in particular. What we're going to move on to next is the add advanced elements section. In this tool, we're going to take and bring in structure and functionality into the editor that we would then need to customize that content. So style is the content's already there. Add advanced elements is where we're going to be bringing in and building out some of these dynamic pieces. Okay, so lots of different things we're going to take a look in that section. This page lists them. We're going to hit them one at a time. So for sake of time, I'm just going to dive right into it by talking about the dynamic panel widgets that you can utilize in these tools. So we have 3 types. We have accordions, expanders, and tabs. So tabs are your horizontally aligned 1 panel at a time. Accordions are vertically aligned 1 panel at a time. And then we have a variation called expander, which are like accordions, except for with these, you can control the panels independently, or you can expand and collapse it as an entire group. Now, default behavior is that accordions and expanders begin with everything collapsed, and tabs begin with the first panel open because with tabs, there is always a panel open. When we take a look at creating these, I will show you how you can change that default behavior. But before we go down the rabbit hole of building these, I am going to share with you some of my very strong feelings about how and where and why and when these should be used. So these dynamic widgets were not designed so that you could take the 4 pages of content you currently have in your course and cram all of that information into a single page. If you have content where students have to open the panel and read it, and open the panel and read it, and open the panel and read it, they're not going to love you, especially if it's more content than they might be able to make it through in a single sitting, because then not only do they have to remember what page they were last in, they have to remember what panel they were in and where in that panel they were. Not the best use case. So then what are good use cases for these? Ideally, these work best as a quick reference. So for example, with things like accordions or expanders, you'll often see these used across the web dealing with things like frequently asked questions. So maybe I want to create a frequently asked questions page in my course where I'm going to put a lot of questions that students often ask me as the teacher so that I can direct them there. They can quickly look through the questions, choose their question, and immediately get that response. Also things like if you have a bunch of extra resources, you can make those available in there. Optional information that students may just optionally be able. Maybe you've got a page there and you've covered this great topic and you think that students might want to dive deeper into that. You might create a deeper dive accordion panel that they can open in to get more resources, or a more resources panel or something like that. And so, works best when you're talking about quick reference rather than something that is sequentially students have to go through one right after the other. Or even if it is something, you might use it as something that's sequentially one right after the other, if it's something that also doubles as they may need to quickly come back in and reference that to find that information in the future. And we'll talk some more about those use cases as we go through. Okay, we've talked about most of those. I will talk about a couple more as we come in. Okay, so let's take a look at actually creating these. So we're going to come into the Design Tools sidebar to our Add Advanced Elements section. And right here at the top is the Accordions and Tabs tool. Now, there are two ways I can add these. I can add as its own content block, which puts a new block at the bottom of the page that then I could use that Add Rearrange to move around in my content. The other option is if I already have my blocks existing and I want to drop in an accordion or a tab into there, I can put my cursor where that needs to go. I can come down and there is this At Cursor option, which puts that first panel and content there at the cursor position. Now, initially, this is not an accordion, expander, or tab. It's really just a heading followed by content. So over here in the sidebar, I need to define what I want it to be, whether that's an accordion, an expander, or tabs. And you'll actually see a little label up here, depending on which one you've selected, to help you know what kind of widget that's going to create. Now, when you're in the blocks view, you see that label. You also see headings, an outline around the heading and an outline around the content and an outline around the whole group. And so that's just kind of a visual way you can see that. So my next caution, please don't ever use just a single tab. I've had people say, oh, but I love the look of just kind of a tab and how it kind of sections off that piece of content. Well, that's great. In the next version, I will give you a way to have that visual appearance, hopefully, without the underlying structure that makes it dynamic, because there are things that happen under the hood that would let a screen reader user, and even to some extent a keyboard user, know that there's functionality there that means absolutely nothing if there's just a single tab. There's always going to be that content visible. They're not changing or toggling anything. So please don't use just a single tab. So then that brings up the next question. If I'm not supposed to use a single tab, how do I get more tabs? So over here in the sidebar, there is this little Add Panel button. Each time I click that, an additional panel is going to be added to the content. Now you might say, wait a second, Kenneth, hold on here. I'm pretty sure you told us that tabs were the horizontally aligned things, and that is clearly vertically set up. Well, you're correct. This is an instance of where what we show you in the editor is an approximate view of what you would get and see when the content's saved. And so we don't build these dynamic pieces for a lot of reasons. It would be hard for you to edit the content. It would be hard for us to keep them functioning as Canvas grows and evolves and changes and browsers grow and evolve and change, et cetera. Those are a couple of the reasons. One reason that makes most people happy about not building it out dynamically is that you can change your mind. So you could build this out as tabs, but then you could come back in a couple of weeks and think, I don't really love that as tabs. Maybe I want it to be an accordion instead. And you can come edit the page and change that type to a completely different type. Structurally, those two are very different. So if we were building out that dynamic functionality in the editor, you wouldn't be able to make that type of change. And so that is one of the benefits that comes from us not building those out. One of the other reasons we don't build these out, these dynamic widgets will work in the browser version of Canvas. They will work in the mobile app version of Canvas. But if you make your content available offline so students can download it, like when they don't have a great internet connection at home, Canvas does not bring in the styling and the functionality that we can use to make these dynamic. And so students in that instance would just get a bunch of headings followed by content. And so that's another reason we don't build that out, is because that content still needs to flow nicely, even when you make it available offline, which is also another great reason why you don't cram 4 pages worth of content into a single page, is because for those users, not very useful and can be very overwhelming, okay? All right, so we have there, where'd it go? I lost it. Okay, here we are. We have our little accordion here. Now, if you see the accordion, expander, or tab label above every single one of your panels, you did it wrong. You came and added like multiple of the block, or added new ones of the cursor. And instead of having one group of three panels, you have three groups of one panel. So they are no longer connected at all. Your tabs are each just going to be a single tab. Your accordions might function more like an expander at that point, but they're visually disjointed. And they're not as easy to navigate, lots of different things. So you just want one label that's above all of your tabs. If you have something different, you did it wrong. Okay. I also want to talk about some editor personality quirks that come into play here, particularly with tabs. So if I'm working with tabs and I want to change the text of this heading, so I come in here and I hit delete, and then I start typing my new heading, you can see that the styling broke there. If the styling broke, really good indication that the functionality just broke as well. When I hit delete, the editor said, oh, he doesn't need this heading anymore, and it got rid of it. And then when I started typing, for whatever reason, it gave me a paragraph tag with a font tag and a span tag inside of it. Not sure where it came up with those, but they're not going to work. So then I'd undo, and I either have to just be more careful with what I select, or because, this does drive me nuts, if you are working with something where you're just dealing with plain text, over here in the sidebar, each of these rows represents one of these panels. And this text is actually a text input. So I could actually come in there and type to avoid those games in the editor. This is also something you should become fairly familiar with the tools, because I could actually use this to come drag and drop and rearrange to change the order of those panels, or I could remove a panel. Or the other thing that I can do is in the first of this, there's this little check mark. That is what will set what is going to be open by default. Now with a tab, if I set the first panel to be open by default, it is a bit redundant. That would have happened regardless of whether I set that, because with tabs, there's always something open. But I could choose the second or third panel if I wanted one of those to be open for some reason instead. With accordions, whichever one of these I flag as being open, when it builds that out, that panel will be expanded so that students can see the content of that, and then they could choose a different panel. So I could choose any panel in my accordion to be open by default. With expanders, these work a little bit different, because with expanders, you can control the headings independently, which also means that you can set as many of those panels to be open by default as you want. So why might I do this? I often see people use like assignments where they give students like 3 or 4 examples of what they can do to kind of show mastery. Maybe they can do a report, maybe they can write a paper, maybe they can make a video, maybe they can, make a slide presentation. They might have multiple options that they can choose from to kind of show that mastery. So what I might do in that instance is I might take an expander and use an expander for each one of the options and have them open by default. And then students can go in and start to close those as they try and narrow down what option they want to choose. So just kind of as some random example that you might use with that. The other thing that you'll see with the expanders is this checkbox for the expand, collapse all controls. These were the 2 buttons that appeared in the top corner of this when I built this out, when we were looking at the save one, that allowed us to control the full group. Now, in my opinion, that's a better user experience to provide to your students, to have that functionality there. I have encountered people, though, that don't agree with me, and I'm okay with that. But since I write the code, I get to decide what the default is. And if you don't agree with me, you get the extra step of having to go in there and turn it off. Okay. All right. So any questions so far about the basics of building out accordions, expanders, and tabs? Another thing that I have encountered periodically when I'm working with these is I may have added one of these into the content or into a content block or something like that, only to realize later that I need some more content after it. Well, the Canvas editor does not let me put my cursor down here. It keeps moving it up here, or if I go down too far, it'll stick it down in this one. And no amount of hitting enter or return in this panel will actually get me out of it. And so one of the other buttons we have over here on the sidebar is just this little insert paragraph after. That just puts a blank paragraph down below it so that you can easily put your cursor in there, and you could convert that to a heading or a list or whatever you need to do. It just lets you escape that so you can add another piece of content. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions up to this point, I am going to trust you with a not so secret secret. You can place your cursor inside of an existing accordion expander or tab. And you can use the @cursor to nest an accordion expander or tab. However, just because you can does not mean that you should. You can create a real usability nightmare if you start to make these weird convoluted combinations of accordions, expanders, and tabs. It was something I initially didn't even allow with the tools, but I had some people show me some very simple, well thought out use cases that I did decide to open that up. And now I'm just trusting you to not make me or your students regret that decision by abusing it. So if you think you have a great use case for a nested accordion expander or tab, I'm going to ask two things of you. One would be that you talk to 2 or 3 of your coworkers to make sure that they agree that that's a good user experience. The second is I'm going to ask you to sleep on it for 2 or 3 days. If you come back and you still feel like it's a good idea, yeah, go ahead and proceed. But just use it cautiously, be kind to your students. That also does bring us to another point with these, which is the heading structure. So when you add these widgets, these headings get created as a level 3 heading, which if it's its own content block, that's about where it should be. But in this instance, where we have nested this inside of an existing block, we already have a level 3 heading here. And so then we have this one, and where we've got this one nested inside of it, you want to make sure that that heading structure is accurate. And the best way to do that at the moment is to use the heading outline tool we talked about in core training, where I could come in and say, you know what, these panels should actually be a level 4 heading. And this very simple, well thought out use case for a nested one should actually be a level 5 heading so that it's structurally organized that way. Now, visually, that didn't really change. Visually, the structure is taken care of by the fact that these are nested inside of panels. We set that heading level up in this way for a couple of reasons. One is that there are some instances where screen readers will still read this heading level. They don't always. Some screen readers, when it's actually an accordion, treats it as its own widget and doesn't necessarily pay attention to that heading structure. But the other thing is when you make that content available offline where it's not dynamic, it's only up to that heading structure so that those students know how the content flows because they don't have the other visual indicators. Okay. Whew. We good on accordions, expanders, and tabs. Oh, what we haven't talked about is content. So because these are just divs inside the editor, almost anything you can build in Canvas, you can build inside of these widgets. So that includes things like images and videos, and I was trying to get up to this example here. But there are some things that we have encountered that don't play nicely. I'm going to cancel editing this so I can get to that list a little bit easier. So, for example, there are a couple of LTI tools that we know don't play well in here. One of them is a math one called GeoGebra. Now, I have seen some of their stuff works fine, others does not. There are some options that you can get that have little buttons across the top. And if it's hidden in a panel, those buttons get all wonky and collapsed and they're not readable. Canvas's H5P LTI integration does not necessarily work well inside these widgets. That one's odd to me because I've been embedding content from H5P's website for years and it works just fine. It's something about the LTI integration that doesn't play nice. The other one is at Utah State, we used Kaltura for our videos. And for some reason with their video playlists, the video playlist still works just fine, but it just got this extra big gray box below it that you couldn't do anything about. And so that was kind of the oddity with that one. And so, if you're building content, and just test it out, make sure it works well inside of those. If you find something that doesn't work, let us know. We do like to know about those things. There are some things we might be able to help with, but there are other things we can't. Odds are if it uses an iframe, we can't do anything about it. Canvas is already waiting for that iframe to say it's loaded before it brings in the JavaScript that we can use to transform these. That also does mean that if you watch this content, as I refresh the page, you'll see that we have the headings for a second and then they get transformed. That's just based off of the content there inside of Canvas. So because Canvas has to wait for the content to load before it brings in that JavaScript, there is that bit of a delay. So if you've got tons of videos, it might take a little while to build those out. The other thing that we have encountered. Math equations using like LaTeX or the equation editor in Canvas. Sometimes those didn't work very well inside this. Now I think I've got that fixed. That one should work. But saying that, Canvas has changed things about 4 times in the last year where I've had to go in and rebuild that because they made some changes. So if you ever find something like that that's not working, let me know and we can fix it again. There was also something that happened in February in between normal releases in Canvas. So I'm not exactly sure what happened, but Canvas added some JavaScript to dynamically resize videos that were added from the course files. And it meant that videos that were coming from the course files that were in like one of these, when you opened the panel, it had 0 width and 0 height. It was in essence invisible. Now, this is not something we can dynamically fix automatically for you. This also it was also mentioned in Canvas that Kaltura in media embedded can have issues. Well, one of the things that I did, actually it was probably the 1st of March when this became available, is when you are working with videos and they're iframed in the editor, as we showed you in core training, one of the things that you can do with iframed content is you can set it so that it scales proportionally. So there's that little button you can say to set scale proportionally. Well, what I did in February is I added some code that anytime a panel is opened, it runs that scale proportional code. And so it will take and restore or resize any of those embedded videos back to a normal size, whether those come from Canvas or Kaltura or anything like that. If you use that, and I actually recommend you do that scale proportionally anyway, because then it avoids like the black bars that can show up along the sides of videos if someone resizes their browser and stuff like that. So that is one way you can get around that. We can't automatically fix them for you, but what we can do is make it so that if you set that, we can then fix it for you, okay? All right, last thing to just kind of note here, we will talk more about this next piece when we get to the advanced training. But there is a way that you can actually create links that point not only to a specific page, but can point to a panel in that page or even point to a panel in the current page. So if I click this accordion panel 1, it will bring this and open up that accordion panel 1 and bring that into view in the editor. If I choose this tab 2, it'll take the focus to that tab 2, open it up so that you can see that. Do these LTI limitations only apply in tabs and accordions? Great question. Of what we've covered so far, that's the only thing that it applies to. But in general, what it is it's anywhere that content might be hidden from students when the content's loading, or any user when the content's loading in Canvas. So we do have a couple of other things we'll take a look at where you can kind of dynamically show and hide content. What it is those tools that struggle, they have some additional code that they run. They do like an initial load, and then they read some other code on their side to try and make their content more responsive rather than just using CSS and stuff like that for responsive design. And so if they're running that code and it kind of it's hidden, they can't read the width and the height of it. And so that's when weird things happen. And so it's anytime that content might be hidden from users that these LTI tool integrations can struggle. Accordions and tabs and stuff is just the first time we're encountering that. So you'll hear me reference back to this as we encounter some of those other tools as well. Okay, we done? We good? Any last questions about these? Okay, next up then we're going to talk about what's called a description list. A description list is just another type of list that's available in HTML. It's where you have some sort of term followed by a description. So that might be a glossary or vocabulary words or things like that. We have 2 styles that you can choose from. You have vertical, where you've got the term in one row with the description slightly indented underneath it. Excuse me. Then we have horizontal, where you've got the term in one column and the description in the next. Now, here's another example of how you might use this. This is the scientific classification for a Bengal tiger. You can see its kingdom, phylum, class, order, suborder, family, subfamily, genus, species, subspecies. Now, these are not just a visual way to break up content. It is an actual type of HTML list that previously you'd have to manually encode inside of Canvas. And so a screen reader user that encounters this would know that they've encountered a description list with 10 items in it. And they know that this description is tied to this term. And so it's building in that semantics even for screen reader users, okay? So let's go ahead and create one of these. What I'm going to do in the sidebar is I'm going to come down to the Add Advanced Elements section. There is a description list panel here, and there's a button to add a description list at the cursor. So if I come down here and click that button, now I have that first term and description pair there at the cursor position in the editor, and I can just use the editor to type in what I need for my content. If I need additional items in this list, just like we did with the accordions and tabs, there's an add item button that will add additional items there. If I come up to another list and I have my cursor in there and I hit add item, it's going to change and add the item to that. If I want to change the layout, default is vertical, but I could choose horizontal, and that'll break it up into the columns. But there are a couple of things I want to point out with the horizontal option. One of them is that it really only works for relatively short terms. If my term gets much longer, it actually gets concatenated with that little ellipsis there. This is something that comes from Canvas. And so if you're dealing with longer terms, stick with the vertical layout. They can be as long as they need and students can see all of that information. The other thing in regard to that horizontal layout is really when it comes to Canvas's mobile app, all the description lists are just going to display vertically. If you're using Canvas's native mobile app, it typically means you're on a smartphone or a smaller tablet where you're dealing with limited horizontal space. So we didn't even recreate that horizontal style. We just default everything to a vertical style there in the mobile app. Okay. All right. Any questions about these? See, these are so much shorter than working with accordions, expanders, and tabs. It does have the add paragraph after it. So just in case you were working somewhere and you wanted to get out. Although Canvas on one of its updates after I built that functionality, and if you are at the very, very end of the last item and you hit enter twice, it will get you out of there as well. But that add paragraph will add it regardless of where you're there. Okay. Good on these. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so the next item we're going to take a look at is something that works really well for those who build out templates that they share with other people. This is what we call the key action items tool. Over the years, as I've worked with people who build out templates, I've seen a couple of practices that are great practices, but they have some odd things that come from them. So for example, it's very common to use like placeholder text. Whether that's a lorem ipsum or something more useful like introduce yourself, describe how you got into this field and why you teach this class. These are great because it gives a prompt for that content creator to put in their information. But a couple of things I've seen happen from these. One of them is that someone follows those instructions great. They write this great introduction to themselves, but then they forget to remove the placeholder. So students read this great introduction only to then read almost an outline that covers exactly the information they just covered. Not great for the credibility of the instructor or the person teaching the class. The other thing that I often see happen is the use of color. Now with Canvas's old editor, it was even worse because it was like the headache-inducing red text color or like the hot pink or lime green, like outline or, background colors that you could select with the editor. And so one of the things I saw with those is that they would replace that placeholder text, but they still were typing inside that colored box. And so everywhere they filled in the information was either that headache-inducing red or that hot pink or that lime green. Also not great for credibility. And so what the key action items tool does is it lets you add content into the editor that's only visible in the editor. So if you look at this examples block here, we've just got a heading and a paragraph. Well, if I go ahead and edit this page in that example block section, we also can see an editor prompt and we can see some editor only instructions. Now, an editor prompt is for like a fill in the blank. This is, you should be inserting this text here. An editor only instruction block can include things like lists, images, videos, just about anything you can put inside of that. Now, to create these, there are 3 different ways you can approach it. Now, the key action items tool is one of a few tools that when it's turned on, it always has a jump menu item up here for it. So that will take me down to the key action items tool in the advanced elements section. Now, I can add just brand new prompts. So if I put my cursor where I want to add an inline prompt, and I choose a new inline prompt, it's going to put it there at the cursor position, and then I can use my cursor to, type in the text for that prompt. If I want a new block of instruction, I usually add my cursor at the first or the end of a paragraph, and I can add a new instruction block. And then I could come in and I could type in those instructions inside the editor there. So that's one way to create them when you're adding them brand new. If you have existing content, there are a couple of other options. One of them is to flag existing content. So I could say, I want this paragraph to be flagged as an instruction block. And so it just kind of changes that so that it has that instruction block style. Or if you're doing something that's like a span or maybe some bold text or something that you've done to try and call out where they just need to insert some text, I could flag that as an inline prompt to create that inline prompt. And then the third option is if they're not like clearly defined or you've got a bunch of other stuff, I can just use my cursor to take and highlight some instructions. And I can wrap that as an inline prompt. So that takes the content I had highlighted and puts it inside of there. Or I can highlight multiple elements and I can wrap that as a block. Now this, once again, like we did with the wrapping the, block alerts and highlights and even the, selection to block feature, it did leave some little empty pieces behind. So I could hit that remove empty in that add blocks to clean those up as well. Okay. All right, so then you're really just using the editor to customize these instructions. You do need to be in the blocks view to see these. If I change over to the browser view or the app view, you won't see any of that because that's designed to give you an idea of what it will look like when saved in the browser or the app. It's only in the blocks view here that I'll be able to see that. And so once you've got all of these created the way you want, the next thing I want to avoid is I don't want the instructor to come in here and say, hi, my name is Kenneth, whatever the case may be, and start filling in those prompts in such a way that when I save it, all of that information is gone. It's actually there, but it's not showing up to students because it's in one of those hidden prompts. And so once you have all of that set up in that key action items tool, there's the ability to lock these. That just makes these so these cannot be edited inside the editor. I could click it and I could delete it if I want to get rid of it, but I'm not going to find myself typing inside that piece there where it's not going to be seen. If I discover as the creator that, I've got a typo in there, I can unlock it so that I could come in and fix that. And then I could just lock it again and save it. So that's how these are built. When it comes to someone actually filling in this information, what happens is whether or not they open the sidebar here, down here at the bottom, they get this key action items button. And if I click on that, it's going to give me a little pop out that says I have 12 steps remaining. Any inline piece here, it's going to create an input because I assume these were a fill in the gap. So maybe this is put your name here. So if I type Kenneth Larson there and I hit enter, it's going to insert that text right by that prompt. And then I can go ahead and mark as complete. And that will remove that prompt and just leave that text behind. With the blocks, with these, I assumed this was like lots of steps that they might go through. And so once they've completed all those, they could come in and say, okay, I'm done with these. And that strips that out. There's no need for these to remain once the content's filled. So it is nice and easy to just kind of remove those from being there in the placeholder. And so that's the basics. Now I can see I only have 10 steps remaining. And so if I save this and come back, it'd show those 10 steps. Now, this is one tool that we do have built for the next generation. And we added some fun new features to it. So in addition to like the inline suggest, the inline prompt and the, block instructions, you can do things like you can recommend a block of content that needs to be inserted. And so you could put in like a particular disclaimer or something like that you think that a teacher might want to add in there. And they can choose to accept it, or they could choose to reject it. Accept it, makes it part of the normal content so that students can see it. Reject it, clears it out. You can flag things in market view that you think they should delete it. And it shows up just fine for students until they either come in and delete it, or they can choose to ignore your suggestion and keep that. If you have lists of items, you can create a checkbox list, which in this, it actually creates a checkbox that as they come and check those off, it gets striped out there in the editor. And so they can see what they've completed. So lots of fun things coming in the future for this tool. but at the moment, it's just going to stay where it is in the current version. We're not going to retroactively add in those additional features, okay? Whew, okay, any questions about key action items? All right.
Oh, sorry, Kenneth. I think
Oh,
have a
go for it.
question. And this may have been something that you touched on while my baby was yelling in my face.
Nope, it's all good. Ask away.
For the key action items, you were talking through the proofs, and you were showing the way someone could complete those key action items. Are those created? Do you create those for your faculty to complete before the course is published, or are those things that you can put in for students to participate in as they're working through the course?
Yeah, great question. These are only visible to those who can edit content. So that would typically just be your faculty.
Perfect.
Now, if you had a page that you created that down at the bottom, you said, let students edit this page, you could potentially use those in that content, but it's not something, those do not show up at all in the saved view.
Got it.
You see it without those. They're technically there hidden in the content, but the content is delivered without those being visible, either to screen readers or normal users.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Okay, let's move on then. Next thing we're going to take a look at is just ways you can drop random chunks of content into the editor. The first one we'll talk about is what we call HTML snippets. This is a way that you can take pre-configured chunks of content and drop them in. Now, we've created a bunch of these built-in snippets for you. We have things like block quotes, additional heading levels, pre-formatted text and code blocks, alerts and callouts in a variety of styles. We showed you how to manually create something like this with the tools. This is a much easier way and faster way to add those in, is using a snippet. So we have a variety of styles there. We have some responsive column layout options you can choose. So on larger screens, they show up as columns. On smaller screens, they stack on top of each other. We have images with captions in a variety of styles and layouts that you can add in. And then we just have some fun little horizontal divider lines you can use to visually break up your content. So those are things we've created for you that are built into the tools. But then also at the institution level, you have the ability to create your own. So if you have little chunks of content you want to build, you can do that through the tools as well. And we cover that as part of that institutional customizations training, where that happens, how that works, et cetera. Okay, so let's take a look at adding in some HTML snippets. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this, and we'll come down here in the content where I have a place to insert this. So the HTML snippets is another one of the tools that always has a jump menu item to take you down to the Add Advanced and the HTML snippets. If you have institution level snippets, you'll see a drop down for those, but you'll always see the course snippets that are built into design tools. And so here in this drop down, we have some different categories with some different options you can choose from. So I could say, you know what, I really want this success block alert. And it will drop that there in the editor, which I just illustrated something that I do far too often, which is my cursor was not actually where I thought my cursor should have been. And so I just dropped it in right at the very first of the page. So that's why this little undo redo button's there. So I can do that. Now I can scroll back down here and actually put my cursor in that position before I actually add in a snippet. The other thing that you can do, when you know what you're looking for, these are a nice quick way to access it. While you're still getting accustomed to what's available, there is this preview snippets that you can use, that you can scroll down through. It has the same categories, and it has the same text that you'd see in the dropdown. But here you actually see an example. So I could say, oh yes, I want that block alert danger. And so it's actually going to drop that content there in the cursor, where I could then use the actual editor to update that content. So that's really the basics of how these work. I do want to show another one of these to you because there are a couple of things to note about it. And that's working with images with captions. So I'm going to put my cursor where I want to add an image with caption. And then here in the drop down, you can see that we have 4 styles under the image with captions. We have basic, Polaroid, overlap light, and overlap dark. And then each of those styles has a left floated, a centered, or a right floated option. And you can kind of see there the size that that image is going to have. So if I select one of these, it's going to drop a placeholder for that image and caption there at the cursor in the editor. And then I can go ahead and customize this. So I could select the image and use the upload embed image tool or any other image tool in Canvas that lets you replace an image to put the new image there. And I could just use my cursor to come in here and type in what I need for a caption. Okay. Okay, so a couple of the reasons I wanted to show you this. One of them is that if you want to change the size of this image and you try and drag the handlebars here, nothing's going to happen. Even if you open up our styling tool and you tried to give this a much larger size, nothing's going to happen. And that's because the size is not tied to the image. It's not based off of the image. It's what we've done is we've created a figure element with an image and a fig caption element inside it. These are specifically designed in HTML to make the association between a figure or an image and its caption. Now, so the width of this is based on the figure, not on the image. The image is just going to be designed to fill it. The other reason that I point these out is that although these are specifically designed for that association, as I understand it, screen reader support for these is not universal yet, unless something's changed in like the last year or so. And so no matter how great of a caption you have, you still want to make sure the image has appropriate alternative text. And you can do that using any of those built-in tools inside of Design Tools to set that up. Just make sure it has appropriate alternative text. Now, if you do come back to the advanced training, we will look at this as an example, and I'll show you kind of an easy way in the tools you can use to change the size of your image. But since it does involve getting into CSS, we're going to save that for the advanced level where we'll show you the tools for working with CSS. There is a relatively easy way to do it, but we'll save that. In the next generation, I do have it built so that if you actually define that here, it identifies that it's in a figure and changes the figure instead of the image, but it was a nightmare to get working. So I'm not going to retroactively add it at this level. Okay, so any questions about HTML snippets? Okay. Next one we're going to take a look at is embedding content. So snippets are predefined chunks of HTML that you can add in. But if you've ever gone to like YouTube or another source and they have embed code that you can add, like an iframe or something like that for some videos, I can copy that HTML. And this tool, the embed content tool, just gives me a little text editor where I can paste in that HTML. And then I can just insert that at the cursor position to actually get that video or that other snippet of HTML just dropped in at the cursor position. It really does the same thing as this tool if you found this in the editor. The problem with this one is when Canvas introduced this new editor, for a very long time, this wasn't available at all. And then for quite a few months, it was hidden inside one of these. And so by the time they actually made it available to where it's a little easier to find, I had been using this one and had it available for a long time. So I didn't bother removing it because it still offers that functionality, but it is kind of that same thing. Doesn't let you bypass any of the limitations in Canvas. Canvas is still going to strip out script tags and certain CSS pieces and stuff that it always does. It's just another way to get that content in the editor. Any questions about embedding content or HTML snippets? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Up next, we're going to talk about adding in icons. Now, you might think, wait, we've already talked about that because we've shown you how to add icons to content blocks and how to add them to links and to your navigation section, et cetera. There are a lot of the tools where an icon picker is just built in. But you may at some point be building some content where you just think, hey, I'd love to use an icon here. So the icons tool is the last one we'll look at that always has a jump menu item up here for it. And we'll talk about these buttons here in just a moment, but let's just say I've built some sort of, success message and I want to add a check mark to it. So I can put my cursor in there, click the insert icon at cursor. I could come in and search for a check mark, click the button, and that adds the icon just right there at the cursor position. Now, if I change my mind and decide I want the circle or the square, because I'm still inserting at the cursor position, now I have 3 icons. Yay. I'm sure that's exactly what we were going for. Well, actually it wasn't. And so one of the other things we can do is we can just switch an icon. So that's where these buttons start to come into play. So every icon here, every button here represents an instance of an icon in the editor. Now, the 3 that I just added haven't shown up here quite yet. I can refresh this list at any time to make sure that it's in sync within the editor. We don't have anything that's constantly checking back and forth to look for any new icons to show up. When you open this tool, it searches the content, or when you refresh the tool, it'll search the content. Okay, so we've got, we can refresh that. So let's say I want to change these little arrows. If I click on that, that opens this up. You can see now I'm replacing that. So if you watch that icon in the editor, each icon I choose just updates that one instead of creating a whole bunch of new ones. Also a great way to just remove an icon. You can do that. Now, Canvas is currently really good at letting you just backspace and delete, but for a long time, it was where if you backspaced and when you went to hit the delete the icon, it actually did something like this, where your heading then became part of the paragraph above it. And so then you undid, and it actually brought the icon back as well. Canvas has kind of gone back and forth over the years to where sometimes it does that and sometimes it doesn't, and then it swaps. And so if that ever comes back, just know that you can, refresh your list, choose that icon and hit delete. And that's a nice, easy way to do it. You can also style icons. So these icons are not images. They are actually what's called an icon font. And so the same types of things you can do with text, you can do with these icons. So for example, I could open up our basic color picker. I could look at this I tag, which is where the icon's set, and I could change that background color, and the color of the icon, that kind of text color, is going to automatically give us the appropriate contrast based on that new background color. You can also get into the realm of working with font size and stuff like that. Know that the Font Awesome icons work really well with most of those things. Canvas's icons, not so much. You can change the colors of those, but things like size just don't really work the way that Canvas designed their icons. You have to use a style sheet, and it's kind of a nightmare to change the size of Canvas icons. But the Font Awesome ones are really good at inheriting styles that you can set on them, okay? And then if you do have a hard time getting your cursor in an icon, that's happened kind of from time to time inside of Canvas. You can use this same section. Whenever you hover over one of these, it actually brings it into view in the editor, but it also sets the focus on it for these tools so that I could come in and I could choose, maybe a different color for that, and so we can turn that tree green, okay? And this does bring us to that topic of accessibility with these. We've talked about the contrast, but in general, if you're using the Design Tools sidebar to add icons to your content, these icons are purely decorative in nature. In fact, they have been designed in such a way that they'll just be ignored by screen readers. Screen readers, users do not need to know I have a universal access icon here to know that this section is going to talk about icons and accessibility. I don't need to tell them I have a little beaker here to know that they're going to be trying something out, because the text alternative is built right into the content. That's actually the way I recommend you use these. But you may come across an instance where you want to use an icon as the sole visual means of relaying information. If you do that, you do have to take additional steps to make sure that there is a screen reader alternative. Now, Canvas does have some ways. There are some things that Canvas has and that we've added in there to help you with that functionality, but it requires you getting into the HTML. And so if you come back for the advanced level, we will show you that as an example with some of the advanced tools to show you how to add a screen reader alternative to something. But until we get it built into the tools, you're kind of on your own to make sure that you're providing those alternatives, okay? All right, so any questions about icons? I'm gonna quickly take a drink while you think about that. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. Okay, the next thing we're going to take a look at is actually one of my favorite things to add to the front page of a course. It works anywhere in your course, but it works really well on the front page. This is what we call the module list. Now, the module list is just a way to easily add links to your modules to the page. It acts just like a normal module link, so that in the browser, you click on it, it takes you to the modules, brings that module into view. In the mobile app, you click on it, and it brings up the list of items associated with that module in the mobile app. And so you've got just these nice, easy links that you can create. Well, as a student, I loved it when my courses had this lovely logical sequence, but it only took me like 3 or maybe 4 modules to find myself scrolling aimlessly up and down the modules page, trying to figure out where I was supposed to be. And so I wanted the ability with this tool to identify for students what the current module is. And so with this, you can indicate what the current module is. Now I'm going to show you a lot of examples here with Modulus before we actually build it, because a lot of this only happens on the saved content. So indicating the current module can be done either manually or using a series of date ranges in the sidebar. And it basically just bolds and kind of flags that current module for students so they know where to go. Works in both the browser and in the mobile app. Offline content is a little less useful because it's going to be stagnant based on when they download the offline content. The other fun thing we can do is in the browser version of Canvas, we can start to include what we call quick links. So if I say that I want quick links for the current module, what's going to happen is once it knows what that current module should be, it will build out below that what a student would see on the modules page in Canvas, with links to the different items, point values, due dates, prerequisites, if it's locked, if it's late, all that kind of information that students would normally see on the modules page, they will now see on this page for the current module. And if I have a date range set so that next week rolls around and we're in part 3, this information would show up for that module instead. So that's quick links for the current module. Mobile app, still just going to show this list. They could click on this module to get this information in the native mobile app. We cannot retrieve this information from Canvas in the mobile app, so we can't build this dynamically there, but it does degrade well there. Okay, the other thing we can do is instead of just including those quick links for the current module, we can actually include them for all of the modules. And what this does is it takes that same list that we looked at before, which is what would still show up in the mobile app. In the browser, it transforms that list into a series of tabs. So I can see I should be on this example module with all of its items, but I could look back and see what I missed in part 2, or I could look ahead and see what's coming up in part 3. And that indicate current will activate the appropriate panel for students based on where they should be in the course. Now, a couple of other things to note with this one. If you'll recall with the list we dealt with before, you saw the full name of the module in the link. Here, I am just seeing part 2. Well, I've seen some really long module names over the years. And if you have 12 modules with really long names and students have to scroll way down to get past those to see this information, far less useful. And so what will happen with this is if you are using a colon in the name of your module, which happens by default if you've used the module list, it will just grab what's in front of that so that it can minimize the amount of space taken up by these tabs. Now you may look at this and think, wait, if we're trying to minimize, why do we have all this extra space here? Well, if you use a name that doesn't have a colon in it, it's going to pull in the full name of that module. And because with even something as simple as like weeks 1 through 12, most browsers that a lot of people use are going to cause that to drop to a second or maybe a third or maybe even a 4th row, even with something that simple. And so we actually will take the longest module name and we make everything the same width so that if it does drop, it creates a nice grid layout there. Because cognitively, it's much easier to find what you're looking for in a nice grid than if those widths and stuff are kind of all over the place. A couple of other things. The color here for the selected module will pull from your main stylized heading if you have it. If you don't and you have a navigation, it'll pull from the main color from the navigation. If you don't have either of those, it really just picks a dark gray color to use to kind of distinguish those. And then another piece to note here is you'll see this little icon that lets me know that the module is unpublished. That happened with any of these variations of the module list, but it only shows up to admins or teachers. They're the only ones that can actually query that module to find out if it is published or not. Students, if you have this set up in place and they click on that, this is just going to be blank. Students in the mobile app, if they click on that link, or if you have just the basic link showing up, Canvas is going to give them that blaring, "You're not authorized to be in here" message that kind of freaks students out. So make sure your modules are published before you make it available to students. But students also see information that you as a teacher or admin do not. So if you're using like the requirements for your items inside of Canvas, down here, they'll see the little check marks for any of those items. But if they've met the requirements, all of the requirements for the module, up here, they'll see a little check mark letting them know that they've completed that module. Or if a module is locked, so in Canvas, you can lock modules based on prerequisites or even like a date range. If a module is locked in Canvas, they'll see a little lock icon up there that shows them that. And if they viewed this, these would show up, but they can't click on them, just like they would normally see in the modules list for those same pieces, okay? All right, so any questions on the functionality of the module list before we actually edit a page and add that in? Then let's add a page and add it in. Okay, so we're going to come to our Add Advanced Elements section. We're going to come down to the module list. And in here, you'll just see this little toggle switch. If I turn this on, any module that is currently published in Canvas is automatically going to be added there into the editor. If it's not published, I can easily turn it on, or really in general with any link, I can control its visibility here using that little eye icon. You should also know me well enough to know you can play with the icons. So let's say that I want to go with like a chess theme here for my course, and I want those all to be pawns, or maybe I want to set an icon for each individual module. I can go ahead and do that as well with the tools. The next section here in the sidebar controls the column layout for the basic list. So when you're looking kind of in the browser, by default, it's going to try and break those into 2 columns. Now, if you have really long module names, maybe you want that just to stay 1 column. If you have really short ones, maybe you want to try 3 columns or possibly even 4 columns. Now, I do actually know how to count. So even though when you select 3, there's 2, and when I select 4, there's 3, these are built to be responsive. So on larger browser canvas sizes, they would see 4 items. But then depending on the browser size, it's going to drop down, which is why I'm only seeing 3 right here, is because that's limited space that it's working with. I do want to point out, though, that you'll notice that if there is not enough room for the full name of the module, it's going to get concatenated there. So it's actually better to err on the side of giving more space than trying to cram things so tight that students can't read the full name of the modules. And so, keep that in mind as well. Next up, we have the browser only features. One of those is where the link points to. So like I said, by default, it acts just like any other module link. It'll take you to the modules page and bring that item up to view. But one other little thing you can do in the browser that doesn't work in the mobile app, but it's kind of fun in the browser. If at the end of this link, we append this little /items/first after the module ID, what Canvas will do in the browser is it will bypass the modules page and just take them to whatever the first item in the module is. So if you have like a great overview page that you want them to just go to, you could add this list, click that first items, and when they click on it, it bypasses and jumps them right to that first item. Now, before you get all excited and start using that on your own, Canvas did a year or 2 ago start stripping that out when you copy from one term to another. We know that you had them in there, so we'll add them back in there when students come in, whether you've edited the page or not. It'll still do that same functionality. But if you wanted to do that on your own, Canvas is going to strip it out when you copy over, okay? All right, so that's that basic functionality there, just ties to the basic list. The next thing we can do is we can add those quick checks. So if I say I want quick checks for the current module and I save this page, nothing's going to happen because I haven't actually told the tools what the current module is, how it's supposed to know that. So there's 2 ways in the sidebar I can do that. One would be to check the box next to the current module. You can see it's already bolded the text here. It's a nice, easy way to do it. But this would require you as the teacher of the course to remember to come edit this page every time the module changed and manually come change it so students can keep up with that. I've taught an online course. No, I'd totally forget that beyond the 2nd or 3rd module as well. So the other option is we can show these date fields. So I can take and say my part 1 training is going to run from Sunday through Saturday. When you set the very first one and this, the others are empty, what it's going to do is it's going to take and duplicate that pattern for each of those. I could come in and change that to something else, but it just sets that initial pattern for me. And so you can go ahead and do that. When we look at the blocks view, you'll actually see that it's writing that date range in as part of that link. But it's not something we show in the browser or the mobile app. It's just used to dynamically identify it. If you did make it available offline, this is kind of helpful because students can kind of see that date range, but it's not, you know, the best option there. Okay, so these do work in the browser. That functionality works in the browser and the mobile app. This is the one piece inside of the Design Tools sidebar that if you are using this and you copy your course from one term to another term, this date piece is the one piece you do have to come in and edit, because there is nothing in Canvas that says the module should be worked on between this point in time and that point in time. Canvas can give you a very firm, you are locked into only participating in this module in this small window. It's not what I wanted. I wanted my students to have a pacing guide while still being able to go review old content. And so this is just a guideline. And so the easiest thing to do when you copy over to a new term is just clear that out and then come set those again for that new period. And apparently I found a bug that I probably won't be able to replicate after this is over, but I'll see if I can and get that resolved. And so we have that content there, okay? And so you can clear it out, come set that new start and end date for that next year. And then that will go ahead and update those pieces. Okay, quick links for current, leaves the list visible and just adds the details at the bottom. Quick links for all is what will transform it into tabs in the browser version of Canvas. None just displays the list for them and they would have to click on it to get to any of that other information in Canvas. Okay, so that's kind of the basics here. One other thing I do want to point out here, the content here in the editor, the names of the modules, the order they're in, etc., is a snapshot of what your module structure looked like when you turned this on. So let's say that when I originally built out this page, this module was actually called continued with my own little ellipsis there. And then I built this page. And then at some point I was thinking, wait, I guess I didn't really need to do that. I could type out the full name. So I went into Canvas, into the modules page, and I renamed the module. Well, because these act just like any other module link, Canvas doesn't do anything to search through the content and update those modules when you change it. What you can do in the sidebar is you can edit this. And if I know I've just changed this module, I could just refresh its title. Or up here, I can actually update all of the module names. So that basically scans through all of the content here, looks at its current name in Canvas, looks at the text in the link, and then updates it so that it has that appropriate text in place. If you've changed the order of modules, what you can do, if you've just added some new ones, you can toggle them on. But if you've changed order, if you just turn one off and then add it back in, it actually rebuilds that. And so it would rebuild it in the correct order. Whew, okay, any questions about the module list? All right, let's move on to the next item here. So we have just 4 items left in this training. And I can tell that because the next one we're going to look at is progress bars. And here I can see we're on item 14 of 17 with 3 items following this page. Okay, so we have 4 different types of progress bars you can add that will give students a visual idea of where they are in the module as they're working their way through it. The basic one just gives you the name of the current module, a total number of items, the numbered item that we're looking at, and then how far through the content that is. The second option here gives that same visual indication of where you are, but what this has done is it has actually created a linked icon that represents every one of these pieces in the module. And so I could click on this to go back to that icons page, and the actual icon would reflect whether it's an assignment, discussion, page, or quiz inside of Canvas. The module item details. Now, actually, before I do that, both of these are really just based on what you're viewing. If I jump back to this icons page, a progress bar on that page would just show me that this is where I'm at in the module. It has no way of knowing that I've been through these other things in the past. These other two give you some of that information. Module item details is really the same thing as quick links. It's just for the current module. It'll give you the details for those items, which would include a little check mark if they've completed any requirements. And then the last option for you as a teacher or an admin, this is just another list of linked icons with the current item flagged. But for students, if there's a completion requirement for one of those, they'd see a little circle next to it. Once they have met that requirement, it gets checked off. If it's late, it gets marked. So no matter what they're currently viewing, anything that they have completed at any point in time, they would see marked off on that progress bar, okay? When it comes to the actual content, all we're doing for progress bars is we're putting in a placeholder. So this is where the basic progress bar is going to be built. This is where the icon one's going to be built, where the module details, where the module item completion. The dynamic creation of that happens on the saved content. So to add a new progress bar, you just put your cursor where you want it to go, come to the Add Advanced Elements, open Module Progress Navigation. You've got your 4 different options there with the option to insert at the cursor position, and it'll put that placeholder there. It does give you this extra paragraph that you can easily delete, but if we didn't give you that and you hit enter, you'd end up with lots of different progress bars because the editor just keeps duplicating what you're currently in. So I figured it was easier to give you that and then have you delete it than, get you trapped. If you put your cursor in an existing one, I can either remove it to delete it, or I could replace it and change it with one of the other styles. And so that's the basics of working with that in the editor. The one other piece you can do in the editor is if I come up, I can open my color picker, and the background color for this placeholder is actually what will be used for the progress color. So if I change this to that City Labs green color, oh, what happened there? I think my undoing and stuff lost my sync. So now we've got the green color. And so if we come in, now when I save this, instead of the blue that you see in the little picture here, it would use that green color instead. So that's this blue, and this blue would be replaced with that. And it's blue for us at City Labs. For you, it's going to match, whatever your default, primary color is for your heading at the institution level, not just at the page level. Okay. All right. Questions about adding progress bars? We do add these as a placeholder because it gives us a lot of powerful functionality. You can build it into a template and then use the module builder to build out your whole course. And there are then working progress bars in every item there in the course. It also means that if I go into the module section of Canvas and I add a new item to this module, every progress bar in this module is going to reflect that. If I move this page to a completely different module, and when a student comes in, it'll build out the progress bar for that new module because it's dynamically being built out. The problem with that dynamic functionality is that it does have a cost. And the cost is that it is not currently compatible with Canvas's mobile apps. There's not a way from the mobile app to query Canvas to find out where you are in a module and what you're looking at, and for a student to see for themselves what they've completed. Canvas's mobile app just doesn't support that. So when it comes to the mobile app, these just disappear. The placeholder, all of that just goes away. They see the rest of the content, but where these progress bars would be, it just vanishes. No empty space, just gone. Okay, we good on these? All right, 2 tools left. Question about the module list, just to double check. Sync between Canvas modules and module list in the DesignPlus is 2-way. If I rename a module in the module list, changes will be reflected in Canvas mode, correct? No, thank you for clarifying. So what you're editing in the content, because it's just like a normal link into a module in Canvas, when you change a link in Canvas, it doesn't go back and retroactively apply that to the source in Canvas. It's just changing the text of the link. So to actually rename that module, you would need to either use native Canvas, or if you renamed it in the module list, that would reflect there as well. But then you have to go into that module list and refresh the names. That's when it goes and looks at Canvas and says, oh, this module name has changed. I need to change that in the content. We do not dynamically do that, in large part because then it's constantly making all these API calls every time you come, in addition to just kind of querying to build that information out. But the other reason is because we can't query that in the mobile app, you as a teacher might always go to that page and say, oh, everything's up to date. But your students who might be using the mobile app wouldn't see that reflected. Their information would be out of date, which is why we actually require you to edit that page to sync that back up to Canvas so that it also syncs it up for your students who might be using the mobile app. Okay, great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, the next 2 tools we're going to take a look at are pretty basic at the moment with some hopeful advances coming in the future. This one is the objectives and outcomes tool. Now, ideally, at some point, I really want to tie this to objectives and outcomes and rubrics and all those fun things you can build in Canvas. However, if you actually have built them in Canvas, you know that they're not exactly fun to build inside of Canvas. They're a bit crazy to work with. Because of that, and because when I built these, this particular tool, Canvas had been talking for a while about completely overhauling how they tied in rubrics and objectives and outcomes, and they were going to completely overhaul this whole aspect of Canvas. I didn't want to build it twice, so I kept procrastinating, hoping they'd finish that before I got to building it. They have not talked about that for a long time. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. So I do hope at some point, after we get the next generation out the door, to try and dynamically tie this into your rubrics and stuff inside of Canvas. But until then, what we do have here in the advanced elements is just, you can just kind of think about this as a clipboard to help you with objectives and outcomes. So the objectives and outcomes tool, default to design tools, is the Bloom's revised taxonomy. We bring this in. This is just a whole bunch of terms to help you write out objectives, because I'm terrible at writing objectives. So I can always insert these terms at the cursor position, or if I'm working with an existing list in the editor, I can choose to add to the current list. So maybe I want my students to identify something, or maybe I want them to critique something, or maybe I want them to role play something. It's just dropping those terms in that I can use to help write out objectives in the editor. At the institution level, you can take, and if you have like official standards or objectives or outcomes or things like that you want to make available, you can do that. So at Utah State, we used IDEA objectives for our online course evaluations. So students would be asked, how did this course do in meeting this criteria? Well, as someone whose course is going to be reviewed based on that criteria, I might want to let my students know that we're dealing with objective 1, and we're dealing with objective 4, and we're dealing with objective 5, so that the first time they encounter this terminology is not when they're reviewing my course. And so at the institution level, you can have as many of these additional pieces as you want. Once again, we go over where and how those are built in the institutional customizations training. This is not building a rubric. It is not tracked in any way whatsoever. It's really just saving you from going out to that website, grabbing, cutting and pasting, or that Word document or that PDF document, copying and pasting into the editor, and then having to clean up all the junk that comes with copying and pasting. It's just a quick way for you to make that information available. Questions about the objectives and outcomes tool? Okay, one tool left. Last tool we're going to take a look at, another one that's pretty basic at the moment, but kind of fun, with some fun plans in the future. This is a way to add some basic information about those who are enrolled in the course using the default teacher and TA roles inside of Canvas. And so if we come down to our Add Advanced Elements, the last section here is teacher and TA details. So anyone with those teacher or TA roles will get controls here. What it's going to do is go grab their user profile image from Canvas. Their name is set in Canvas, their role as teacher or TA, their email address is set in Canvas, with also the ability to add things like a phone number, department, or office hours. These last three just get saved in the browser, so that as a cookie kind of thing, so that it can remember it when you're working on other courses. But if I go ahead and insert that as a content block, I get basic information about the teacher there on the page. Now, you can edit the content over here and update the details, or I could come over here and let's say I want to change the border style of the image, and I want to come in and create my own new item at the bottom, and I want to come add an icon at the first of it, which I do recommend you take that process. If you're going to add the content first and then the icon. Otherwise, sometimes you end up typing inside the icon, which gives you a weird looking font. And so you can do stuff like that in the editor. However, if you've done stuff like that in the editor and you come over and you make changes and you update the details, it rebuilds it. So you lose the manual stuff you did in the editor. I did that because, I thought, every time you create a new user profile image, it gets its own unique URL. So there's nothing tying that so that it can automatically replace. So we'll just give you that ability to easily update the details. In the next generation, we'll make that a little smarter so that it'll just update the details without removing any of the custom styling or other pieces you've added. Another thing that I get asked is if there's a way to add just like a generic one as like a placeholder in a template. Once again, I figured when I initially built this, it was like, it was easy enough to add the real information that I didn't make a generic one. In the next generation, we will do that so that you could put your cursor in it and then just choose a teacher, and then it's just going to update those relevant pieces for that teacher. I do also have a bunch of additional layout styles and options and stuff that I want to build when we get this built for the next generation. So at the moment, pretty basic, but there are some fun things coming in the future. Any questions about the teacher and TA details tool? Okay, that being said, you have all survived intermediate training of DesignPlus for the design tools sidebar. So you've learned to play with colors, margins, padding, building accordions, HTML snippets, progress bars, teacher and TA information, lots of fun things for you to go to play with. For those of you who have not had enough insanity, you're welcome to come back for the advanced training. I've mentioned some of the things we'll take a look at there, like our advanced color picker and looking at, adding like screen reader only content and some of those things that get more CSS and HTML. If you're not terribly familiar with CSS and HTML, don't necessarily let that keep you from coming in here. We don't go too far down that rabbit hole, but I may show you some things that may want you to start you down that rabbit hole. But we'll take a look. There's also a few other advanced elements that come into play at that level as well. But unless any of you have any last minute questions, we'll let you go. You can have 14 minutes back of your afternoon, evening, morning, depending on what part of the globe you're from, and let us know if you have any questions along the way.
This has been great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for coming. Thank you all for the great questions and helping clarify, and for your, emojis on your videos as well. Those are very helpful.
Yes, and thank you for recording. I'm going to need the recording, I think.
Yeah, and you should get a copy of that just like you did from the others. Michelle will send that out probably tomorrow or something after it's compiled and all come together. So
Awesome. Thanks again. Take care.
Yep.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, we'll see you the advanced in about a month.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, bye.